Chapter 1 Be Still and Know. Religious life is life. 20 years ago, at a conference I attended of theologians and professors of religion, an Indian Christian friend told the assembly, "We are going to hear about the beauties of several religions, but that does not mean we are going to make a fruit salad." When it came my turn to speak, I said, "Fruit salad can be delicious. I have shared the Eucharist with Father Daniel Berrigan, and our worship became possible because of the suffering we Vietnamese and Americans shared over many years." Some of the Buddhists present were shocked to hear I had participated in the Eucharist, and many Christians seemed truly horrified. To me, religious life is life. I do not see any reason to spend one's whole life tasting just one kind of fruit. We human beings can be nourished by the best values of many traditions. Professor Hans Kung has said, "Until there is peace between religions, there can be no peace in the world. People kill and are killed because they cling too tightly to their own beliefs and ideologies. When we believe that ours is the only faith that contains the truth, violence and suffering will surely be the result." The second precept of the Order of Interbeing, founded within the Zen Buddhist tradition during the war in Vietnam, is about letting go of views. Do not think the knowledge you presently possess is changeless, absolute truth. Avoid being narrow-minded and bound to present views. Learn and practice non-attachment from views in order to be open to receive others' viewpoints. To me, this is the most essential practice of peace. Dialogue, the key to peace. I have been engaged in peace work for more than 30 years, combating poverty, ignorance, and disease, going to sea to help rescue boat people, evacuating the wounded from combat zones, resettling refugees, helping hungry children and orphans, opposing wars, producing and disseminating peace literature, training peace and social workers, and rebuilding villages destroyed by bombs. It is because of the practice of meditation, stopping, calming, and looking deeply, that I have been able to nourish and protect the sources of my spiritual energy and continue this work. During the war in Vietnam, I saw communists and anti-communists killing and destroying each other because each side believed they had a monopoly on the truth. Many Christians and Buddhists in our country were fighting each other instead of working together to stop the war. I wrote a booklet entitled Dialogue, the Key to Peace, but my voice was drowned out by the bombs, mortars, and shouting. An American soldier standing on the back of a military truck spit on the head of my disciple, a young monk named Nhat Hanh. The soldier must have thought we were Buddhists, that we were undermining the Americans' war effort, or that my disciple was a communist in disguise. Brother Nhat Hanh became so angry that he thought about leaving the monastery and joining the National Liberation Front. Because I had been practicing meditation, I was able to see that everyone in the war was a victim, that the American soldiers who had been sent to Vietnam to bomb, kill, and destroy were also being killed and maimed. I urged Brother Nhat Hanh to remember that the GI was also a war victim, the victim of a wrong view and a wrong policy. I urged him to continue his work for peace as a monk. He was able to see that, and he became one of the most active workers in the Buddhist School of Youth for Social Services. In 1966, I came to North America to try to help dissolve some of the wrong views that were at the root of the war. I met with hundreds of individuals in small groups, and also with members of Congress and Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. The visit was organized by the Fellowship of Reconciliation, an interfaith peace organization, and many active Christians helped me in these efforts, among them Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Father Thomas Merton, and Father Daniel Berrigan. These were, in fact, the Americans I found it easiest to communicate with. Touching Jesus. But my path to discovering Jesus as one of my spiritual ancestors was not easy. The colonization of my country by the French was deeply connected with the efforts of the Christian missionaries. In the late 17th century, Alexander de Rhodes, one of the most active of the missionaries, wrote in his Catechisms in Octo Dies Divisius, just as when a cursed barren tree is cut down, the branches that are still on it will also fall. When the sinister and deceitful Sakya, Buddha, is defeated, the adulterous fabrications that proceed from him will also be destroyed. Later, in the late 1950s and early 1960s, Catholic Archbishop Diogo Dinh Thuc and his efforts to evangelize Vietnam leaned heavily on the political power of his brother, President Ngo Dinh Diem. President Diem's 1963 decree prohibiting the celebration of Wesak, the most important Buddhist national holiday, was the straw that broke our back. Tens of thousands of lay and ordained Buddhists demonstrated for religious freedom, leading to a coup d'etat and the overthrow of Diem's regime. In such an atmosphere of discrimination and injustice against non-Christians, it was difficult for me to discover the beauty of Jesus' teachings. It was only later, through friendship with Christian men and women who truly embody the spirit of understanding and compassion of Jesus, that I have been able to touch the depths of Christianity. The moment I met Martin Luther King Jr., I knew I was in the presence of a holy person. Not just his good work, but his very being was a source of great inspiration for me. And others, less well known, have made me feel that Lord Jesus is still here with us. Hebe Kolbrug, a beautiful Dutch woman who saved the lives of thousands of Jews during World War II, was so committed to helping Vietnamese orphans and others desperately needing children during the war that when her government refused to support this work, she gave them back her World War II medals. Reverend Heinz Kloppenberg, General Secretary of the German Fellowship of Reconciliation, also supported our humanitarian work. He was so kind and so open. I only needed to say a few words to him and he understood everything right away. Through men and women like these, I feel I have been able to touch Jesus Christ and his tradition. Real communication. On the altar in my hermitage in France are images of Buddha and Jesus, and every time I light incense, I touch both of them as my spiritual ancestors. I can do this because of contact with these real Christians. When you touch someone who authentically represents a tradition, you not only touch his or her tradition, you also touch your own. This quality is essential for dialogue. When participants are willing to learn from each other, dialogue takes place just by their being together. When those who represent a spiritual tradition embody the essence of their tradition, just the way they walk, sit, and smile speaks volumes about the tradition. In fact, sometimes it is more difficult to have a dialogue with people in our own tradition than with those of other tradition. Most of us have suffered from feeling misunderstood or even betrayed by those of our own tradition. But if brothers and sisters in the same tradition cannot understand and communicate with each other, how can they communicate with those outside their tradition? For dialogue to be fruitful, we need to live deeply our own tradition and at the same time listen deeply to others. Through the practice of deep looking and deep listening, we become free, able to see the beauty and values in our own and others' traditions. Many years ago, I recognized that by understanding your own tradition better, you also develop increased respect, consideration, and understanding for others. I had a naive thought, a kind of prejudice inherited from my ancestors. I thought that because Buddha had taught for 45 years and Jesus only 2 or 3, that Buddha must have been a more accomplished teacher. I had thought that because I did not know the teachings of Buddha well enough. One day, when he was 38 years old, the Buddha met King Prasenjat of Kosala. The king said, "Reverend, you are young, yet people call you the highest enlightened one. There are holy men in our country 80 and 90 years old, venerated by many people, yet none of them claim to be the highest enlightened one. How? How can a young man like you make such a claim?" The Buddha replied, "Your Majesty, enlightenment is not a matter of age. A tiny spark of fire has the power to burn down a whole city. A small poisonous snake can kill you in an instant. A baby prince has the potentiality of a king, and a young monk has the capacity of becoming enlightened and changing the world. We can learn about others by studying ourselves. For dialogue between traditions to be deep, we have to be aware of both the positive and negative aspects of our own tradition. In Buddhism, for example, there have been many schisms. 100 years after the passing of the Buddha, the community of disciples divided into two parts. Within 400 years, there were 20 schools, and since then, there have been many more. Fortunately, these separations, for the most part, not being too painful, and the garden of Buddhism is now filled with many beautiful flowers, each school representing an attempt to keep the Buddha's tradition alive under new circumstances. Living organisms need to change and grow. By respecting the differences within our own church and seeing how these differences enrich one another, we are more open to appreciating the richness and diversity of other traditions. In a true dialogue, both sides are willing to change. We have to appreciate that truth can be received from outside of, not only within, our own group. If we do not believe that, entering into dialogue would be a waste of time. If we think we monopolize the truth and we still organize a dialogue, it is not authentic. We have to believe that by engaging in dialogue with the other person, we have the possibility of making a change within ourselves, that we can become deeper. Dialogue is not a means for assimilation, in the sense that one side expands and incorporates the other into itself. Dialogue must be practiced on the basis of non-self. We have to allow, that is, what is good, beautiful, and meaningful in the other's tradition to transform us. But the most basic principle of interfaith dialogue is that the dialogue must begin, first of all, within one's self. Our capacity to make peace with the another and with the world depends very much on our capacity to make peace with ourselves. If we are at war with our parents, our family, our society, or our church, there is a possibility, a probability, that a war is going on inside of us too. So that the most basic work for peace is to return to ourselves and create harmony among the elements within us, our feelings, our perceptions, and our mental states. That is why the practice of meditation, looking deeply, is so important. We must recognize and accept the conflicting elements that are within us and the underlying causes. It takes time, but the effort always bears fruit. When we have peace within, real dialogue with others is possible. Interbeing. In the Psalms, it says, "Be still and know that I am God." Be still means to become peaceful and concentrated. The Buddhist term is samatha, stopping, calming, concentrating. Know means to acquire wisdom, insight, or understanding. The Buddhist term is vipassana, insight, or looking deeply. Looking deeply means observing something or someone with so much concentration that the distinction between observer and observed disappears. The result is insight into the true nature of the object. When we look into the heart of a flower, we see clouds, sunshine, minerals, time, the earth, and everything else in the cosmos within it. Without clouds, there could be no rain. There would be no flower. Without time, the flower could not bloom. In fact, the flower is made entirely out of non-flower elements. It has no independent individual existence. It inter-is with everything else in the universe. Interbeing is a new term, but I believe it will soon be in the dictionary because it is such an important word. When we see the nature of interbeing, barriers between ourselves and others are dissolved, and peace, love, and understanding are possible. Whenever there is understanding, compassion is born. Just as a flower is made only of non-flower elements, Buddhism is made only of non-Buddhist elements, including Christian ones, and Christianity is made out of non-Christian elements, including Buddhist ones. We have different roots, traditions, and ways of seeing, but we share the common qualities of love, understanding, and acceptance. For our dialogue to be open, we need to open our hearts, set aside our prejudices, listen deeply, and respect truthfully what we know and understand. To do this, we need a certain amount of faith. In Buddhism, faith means confidence in our and others' ability to wake up to our deepest capacity of loving and understanding. In Christianity, faith means trust in God, the one who represents love, understanding, dignity, and truth. When we are still looking deeply and touching the source of our true wisdom, we touch the living Buddha and the living Christ in ourselves and each person we meet. In this small book, I shall try to share some of my experiences of and insights into the two of the world's most beautiful flowers, Buddhism and Christianity, so that we as a society can begin to dissolve our wrong perceptions, transcend our wrong views, and see one another in fresh, new ways. If we can enter the 21st century with this spirit of mutual understanding and acceptance, our children and their children will surely benefit.